Hi, everyone. I'm Clarissa. My pronouns are she, her, hers. I am moderating this discussion for those of you that don't know me, but I think I know pretty much everyone here. And today, our Tough Topic Tuesday, we're going to be talking with the Career Center, and we're going to be talking about like our authentic self and bringing our authentic self to work and what that looks like. Before I ask everyone to introduce themselves, I'm going to do a land acknowledgement. Emerson College, Boston, resides on the ancestral and unceded lands of the Massachusetts people, whose name was appropriated by this Commonwealth. We pay respect to the Massachusetts elders, past and present. We acknowledge the truth of violence perpetrated in the name of this country and make a commitment to uncovering that truth. So, with that, if our panelists would like to introduce themselves, so the Career Center, that would be great.
All right, so I am Sharon Shiffer. I am the Equity and Access Coordinator, totally new position. Been here close to 2 months now. My purpose is really to help students who have been historically disadvantaged in college and to help them guide and find the careers that they are dreaming of. And I use the pronoun she, her, and hers.
Okay, I'll hop in there next. My name is Jessica Chance, proud alum, Lion Pride right here. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And actually, I think we also were just thinking about what authentic self means, especially thinking about, Sharon's role and, underrepresented students. I think when I think about what it actually means for all of us, or I should say myself, being able to bring different aspects of who I am and my interests and what I love that is connected to my job, but not always connected to my job, and knowing that that is embraced in the space that I'm in. And so that's one thing. I could go on about 10 million different things, but that's something that comes to mind. So I will now pass it to Drew.
Hello, I am Drew. I'm the intern coordinator here at the college, also soon to be alum as of spring 2022. Woohoo, yeah, fabulous. My pronouns are they and them, so I'm trans non-binary, which is a whole different conversation, but I felt pertinent to bring up when we talk about authentic self at work and what that means. And I think presentation is something really important and not disguising that. So again, that's something I can go on and on about, but that's not what today is about. So that's me.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Emmy. I am the Assistant Director, International Student Career Services. Authentic self. I want people to be able to come as themselves into my space. So I have to be that if I want that, whatever that means that day. If it means that, if I'm struggling with something, I need to know that that's happening in my head as I'm riding up the elevator, because I want to set myself up for knowing what state I'm in so that I can work on a few things, maybe before my first appointments, just sort of think things over, process, check in with colleagues, keep it real from the get-go. Otherwise, I feel like I'll carry that burden for the rest of the day. I don't know if that says what that says right now, but that's, I guess, my authentic self in the moment. So there you have it.
I realize I didn't even answer the question. But so my authentic self, believe it or not, I didn't answer it, is really being able to bring as many aspects that feel real to me in that day. So if we talk about identity, it's very complex. So maybe something resonates. Maybe I have a conversation with Emmy and something resonates about food. We both love rice. Being able to have that type of moment and not no suppression in the moment, and being able to really connect with folks in that way and bringing yourself to work in that way. So sorry, I meant to answer that and I didn't.
No, don't worry. I don't even think we got to that yet. You're ahead of the game. I think it started coming up in introductions, but thank you for that. So don't worry, you're all good. But also before I get to the questions, one thing I wanted to bring up also is, I thought this was also interesting, is when I posted this on Instagram, we actually had someone comment, and he said, please teach students to be astute and pay attention so they do not reveal their authentic selves to those who do not value or appreciate them. And I also thought that was like an interesting thing, maybe to just like keep in the back of our heads. I'm not sure if we're going to have like a question about that, but like any thoughts on that at some point if we have time at the end, and about like, you know, kind of like bringing your authentic self, and also making sure that, you know, you're giving people the time of day who respect you. So I think that's what he was trying to get across. So maybe if we have time at the end, we can touch on that. But yeah, with that, our first question is, what does your authentic self mean to you? Sharon kind of kicked that off for us, so thank you for that. If others would like to answer that, I know a little bit in your introductions you were able to, but whoever wants to sort of pick that up.
I'm happy to just jump right in. Is talking from a personal lens. I mean, I'm trans, and that's something I talk about quite often now. But in my career and in my life, it's been a topic that no one wants to talk about or touch on, or is confused about, or treads very lightly on. So I think sometimes it's redundant, and I'm sure like Jess and Emmy and Sharon like hear me talking about it all the time because we work together in the same office. But it's important for me to constantly talk about it and bring it up. And to hear that comment, I'm like, what you see is what you get. Like, you know, there's no reason for me not to be my authentic self, whether people deserve it or not, because it's not about them. You know, it's about me. So that's what you see is what you get.
Interesting. Can I jump in? Is that okay? Oh, sorry.
No, that's okay.
Emmy, go.
I just wanted to like rah, Drew, because that's what it is. It's not about other people. Being your authentic self is not, you don't mold yourself. I mean, you know, you're in different settings and you do, there's a code switching kind of thing, because, you know, you're with a different group of people. You bring a certain set of perspectives into different settings, like, you know, at different kinds of meetings with different people and stuff like that. And all of that's okay. It's not bad. But if you feel like you're hiding yourself and you can't be real, and you feel like there's a burden there, that's something to like pay attention to. Like maybe that's not the space that you feel safe in. Like just being attentive to yourself. I think the authenticity is knowing yourself, you know, and that's a process. I don't know everything there is to know about myself. Sometimes people point some things out to me, or they encourage me in a certain way, or they give me feedback, you know, for in certain situations. But just sort of listening and seeing what I'm like, how I react to things, and question myself and process that with others that I trust, you know, helps build an understanding of authentic self. Because I think authentic self is a development thing. I don't think we know that we know everything there is to know, but our openness to ourselves and discovery is also a part of the process.
And I think to answer that question from, I guess it's a little bit to the second question, and then the comment that came up in Instagram. It's kind of like who you give your energy to also, because I think when I was a student at Emerson, and then just growing up, it's sort of, you're trying to figure out what word space you feel safe in, who's going to accept me, and sometimes overthinking it to the point where it's like, you know, getting to Drew's point, it's like, you know what, I am who I am. Like, if you have a problem with that, it is what it is. But then coming to the conclusion of like, well, then this is the community and the space and the people that I'm going to give my energy to. And so I think that astuteness comes out of like, okay, this is where it's worth my time and energy to really make that connection. And anyone else that doesn't get me, that's just not the space or the people for me. And so it's a combination of coming into yourself and not apologizing for it, and finding those spaces. For me, it was in classes to some degree, but definitely when like I graduated, it became that much more important when I started looking for work. So.
Chris, I know you wanted to add something, if you want to do that now.
Yes, Chrissy.
Hi, everybody. Yeah, I joined a little late. Sorry. Nice to see you all here. Really glad to be here. Yeah, this is an interesting one, right? Like, okay. So professionally, I've always, and personally, I've lived in San Francisco and here, right? And so San Francisco in particular has a real culture where like being queer is like, it's just part of the fabric of the place, right? Like no one bats an eye. Boston is not quite in that place, but the circles that I'm in and the places I live and where I work, it's always been very comfortable because I've always worked in music and arts kind of schools and scenes. But having said that, this is a really interesting question to me because, well, there's like my queer identity, there's that piece of it. And that would be interesting to think and talk about. And then there's just me, myself, my personality, right? Like, and I knew early on that I didn't want to have to put on a big facade at work. So I was going to have a hard time working in a corporate set. I mean, I didn't want to anyway, but a hard time working in the private sector, a hard time working in places where just you have to show a certain way, you have to show up a certain way, you know? And yeah, but I think my work happiness has often been closely correlated to places where I can be fully myself, right? Which means not just the queer identity stuff, but just like I can be a little eccentric and quirky and, you know, whatever, like I am who I am. And, but just places where that's been okay. And I haven't felt like I've had to shut all that down. I don't know if that's speaking to anybody, but, and then the queer identity part is an interesting thing. And particularly, I think around gender identity, this has been a really interesting thing for me over the past several years, because I, you know, grew up in a time where to be like non-binary was not really a term or a thought or an identity, right? And so if you were trans, generally it meant you were going to fully transition from being, at the time you would have talked about it as being biologically male to female or biologically female to male, whatever. And all this stuff has emerged in the past 10 or 15 years around the non-binary stuff and all the in-betweenness and everything. And this has been very interesting for me just to be at Emerson as all that is happening, because it's younger generations that are pushing that stuff forward. And, you know, I kind of occupy sort of a tomboyish, soft butch middle place. That's how we used to would have talked about it now. But now, I will say it was challenging for me a few years ago when it became just the norm to ask for pronouns at the beginning of meetings and to introduce ourselves with pronouns, because even now, on the one hand, I want females to be able to show up and look like me in all the ways that I show up. You know what I mean? Like I dress in male clothes, typically sort of neutral, androgynous, but male clothes I shop in the men's section. I wear my hair shorter than this sometimes, you know what I mean? Like I don't wear makeup, like I get read as a guy frequently when I'm out in public, at least at first glance. And I want female identified people to be able to show up like this. I don't think that all female identified people need to feel like they have to identify as non-binary or something else to look this way and sound, you know what I mean? So like, I want there to be space for that. And I want our students to see that. And I want my colleagues to see that. On the other hand, you know, given today's terminology and thinking and everything, I probably do occupy somewhere in the non-binary, really. And so that's been like a shift for me to kind of wrap my head around. And I have had a couple students in my immersion class, because I'm facilitating 2 sections of immersion this semester. I had 2 students, when I meet with them one-on-one, say, gosh, I'm just so glad I'm in your class. I'm so glad you're here because I'm non-binary, and it just helps so much to have you, you know, in the space and to be able to see you and know you're here and have other students see you and just like you're normalizing it and everything. And that was interesting because I hadn't said to either class that I identified as non-binary. And I think when I introduced myself with my pronouns, I said something like, I usually use the she series, but like whatever, I'm not particularly attached to that. So they read that in whatever way they were going to read that. So it's interesting now, because on the one hand, I want like there to be space for like females to look like me and act like me and like have all these masculine, traditionally masculine features, but still be female if they want to. And then I also, so part of me still wants to introduce myself with she series pronouns a lot, but then in some spaces I also want to, you know, ally myself with folks who are non-binary or trans or whatever, students in particular. And so I'm trying to think about how to do that. You know what I mean? So, and anyway, and then all that has to do with just efforts being a space where I can do that. And I can do that even more now that I've moved over into the student affairs division. And Clarissa and Priscilla, I don't know if this will mean anything to you, but I used to work in a different division of the college, which is a great division as well. But And my office was super, but just in terms of the whole division, the vibe was a little different. Whereas over here in student affairs and campus life, people really are thinking about these issues, talking about these issues. So I feel much more comfortable. So I've even noticed, like in the past couple of years, like I'm even dressing even more like I do now than I was before. I mean, I don't ever shop in the women's section, and I don't ever dress up anymore. I mean, I haven't for years and years, but I don't wear women's blazers. I just don't do any of it anymore. You know what I mean? So that's sort of
Getting at our pod meeting.
yeah. So that's been good. And I'll just say one other thing, which is I used to work in admissions, not at Emerson, but in the world of music conservatories. And I would be out on the road, and I would be, in these schools giving tours. I'm the director of admissions. I'd be leading info sessions, talking to parents. And it was always this thing at the time, and maybe this just was where I was at developmentally, but particularly when I was recruiting in parts of the country that are just less open to some of the gender and queer stuff. I always had these questions around like, how much should I try to package that up? Because when you're in admissions and you're recruiting, you're trying to get folks to come to your school, right? And so we would go to, like Texas or some places in the plains, in the middles, or just particular communities that I knew were more conservative that might have fabulous musicians. And so we would want the musicians to come to our school. But I just wasn't sure how much of myself to bring into the space in a way that they would be like, oh, you're some kind of weirdo, queer, coastal, urban, liberal, whatever. And that's not what we want. So we're not going to go to your school. So I was constantly trying to do these metrics of like how much I could bring myself and how much not. So I'm glad to not be doing that piece anymore. But I don't know, that's just a lot of different things. But just to say that, yeah, for me, it's been both really helpful, I think, to my overall quality of life, not just at work, but in general, to be in a space where I can be myself. But it's also been interesting to be at Emerson and around young people who are thinking about this stuff and pushing this stuff forward, because it's pushed me to, think in different ways around all these things. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. That was great. Thank you so much. I'm just like loving everything everyone's saying. And especially just like regarding the Instagram comment, it's like, you just gotta like show up and like be your authentic self and like see kind of like who, like you should be giving energy. I think Jessica said this, like giving energy to like those that, you can be your authentic self around. Like if you're not, and I think Emmy said this, like you should just, that's something you should like notice if your authentic self isn't like appreciated in a space that you are. But like there should never be sort of like something that doesn't allow you to be your authentic self. Like just you should be your authentic self all the time. And I agree with that. I remember in high school, my parents were like, oh, you're living a double life, because they were like claiming that I wasn't authentic. And they were right. I wasn't being authentic. I was one person in one place and another person in another place. And it really took to like finding who I was to then just honestly just like enjoy your life more. It's like, it's much more enjoyable to just be yourself and give energy to those that respect that. So glad we were talking about that. So I guess the next question, we kind of touched on this, but like, how did you embrace your authentic self in class, on campus, and currently at work?
Can I throw in a shortish answer? I don't know, maybe it won't be that short, but I think there's a range to this. Not too long ago, I was in the space directly behind Drew. There's a chair there. And I don't think that there were a lot of people in the office that day, but I was super slouchy. And I said to Drew, I'm so glad I can slouch in your presence. Like I could be a potato. I could be a potato by Drew, that I could be myself. And I feel like I'm not going to get judged, I don't think. Because I can't read Drew's mind. Maybe they judged me. But anyway, there's a range. Like, and the tougher end of that range is when you have to be vulnerable to people you don't necessarily feel safe with, because you want to bring a challenge into their head, their brain. I was in a class last night, and I had to bring my authentic self to the classroom. And I was presenting, and it went really well, but I was presenting on a very difficult topic. And the author of the poetry book is an Asian American woman, and the content of the book included a lot of violence, a lot of injustice. And previously, with the other students who brought their presentations, they always gave this trigger warning. But that trigger warning didn't apply to them because they weren't the sort of subject matter in the book. So they'd say trigger warning. So just so you know, and if you need to turn off your camera or step away for a while. but I'm like, I have to present on something that I actually would shut off my screen and leave the room, but I was presenting, so there's nothing I could do about it. So I was like, what happens with a trigger warning when you can't escape? And I was like, that's my authentic self right now. So right now I'm shaking as I'm presenting because this stuff is traumatizing me. So to be able to say that to the students and have them have this moment where they're like, oh, we didn't have to go through that, was something that was educational at the same time for them, but also at my expense because there's nothing I could do about it. But I got through it as best I could. But it was, it was for me that authentic self that came with a burden. Whereas with Drew, I was just kind of like, I could let loose and be like, okay, I'm just going to relax here. So there's a range of bringing your authentic self to work, to class, to campus, and however that is.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. And I feel like it very much is an evolution because as a new college grad, there is no way that I was bringing my authentic self. I was very much just like in the mold, like very like super, super, almost like a carbon copy of everyone I graduated with. And it was kind of sad because I felt like, okay, I would like push through and be like, all right, I can make it through like 8 hours and then I can like release my true self to my friends and to the people that I feel comfortable with. So it's been like a true evolution for me as I've been like in the workforce now for like 10 years, a little bit more than that, to feel more comfortable, like almost like each time it's kind of like pushing myself a little bit to say like, okay, if I include this aspect of myself, how do people respond? If they're responding positively, then I feel like, okay, cool. It's almost like, giving like a little bit of a bait to be able to like continue to do it. So then, and then you notice too, as you get that very positive reaction that you continue to do it. So I know that for me, it's very much been an evolution of that. As someone who grew up primarily as I would say like my main identity is as an immigrant kid. I'm Indian American and I was very, very young. I was less than a year old when we moved to the United States. So very much like an immigrant experience, a lot of pressure put on me, that those kind of like universal things that may be true, and like really being able to sort of like let go of that, but also like really having an affinity for people who have a similar experience and knowing when I can share that and when it feels authentic to share it and how much to share. So it is like every day I feel like I navigate that, but as I continue to get older, I continue to feel like more and more comfortable kind of talking about those aspects of myself as opposed to just like, kind of blending in like I did for so many years. So it feels just so much better. And I feel so much like more supported in an institution where like diversity is something that people really, really do embrace and want to get to know you as a person and not just like, just another, person that exists in an institution. So it's good. It's been a good evolution for me.
I go ahead, Jess, I see you going.
Oh, no, I was just gonna say, I mean, the only thing I remember there's a couple of things. I mean, the first thing I will say is that I will give a shout out to Professor Wendy Walters, who was one of my first faculty experiences at Emerson, and first white woman that taught African-American literature. And I was like, oh, this is gonna be interesting. And I remember feeling like I could bring my authentic self through the literature that we were studying. And I remember, and it's a little similar to what you were saying, Amy, about sort of this, is it a burden? What is this process like? But then feeling like I made the choice and I felt like I had the choice and it wasn't put on me, because I do think I was the only Black student in the class, of being able to talk about a particular poem that we were studying. And so I felt like I could relate some of my personal experience through the poetry in the class. And that was one of those instances, to what you were saying, Sharon, I dipped my toe in there to be like, okay, what's gonna happen? How are people gonna respond? And that was one of the few times when I started to do that in school. And then my first like professional job out of Emerson, and this was like years later, it was a more gender specific experience where I was in a conference room and everybody in the room was a man, big, tall men. And here's me, petite, soft-spoken, reserved Jessica. And I remember being in the space being like, okay, all right, I gotta pump it up. I gotta be like, I gotta like make sure, and if like, Jessica now could tap Jessica on the shoulder, then I would say, dude, just chill out, just be yourself. So it was those sort of instances where I felt like I had to sort of, like you were saying, Sharon, like mold myself into this very male dominated space and stick my chest out. I would never do that now. But it took 20 years, to get there. And so, we're trying to kind of help y'all do it a little bit sooner. But anyway, it's funny, but it's an observation from the past that I hope answers that question. Drew, go. Sorry.
I think on the opposite side, I was like quite loud. I mean, I'm loud today. You should have seen me like 10 years ago, even 15 years ago, but I'm pretty loud as an individual. But I always thought, I mean, I'm at so many different intersections of intersectionality. There's so many different experiences that set me outside. Drew got less loud. We can have a competition, trust me. I'll be louder. But even today, like even the type of English that I speak, and I code switch, I go back and forth as I just did just now, but I'm still like learning because like I was always told like that's not professional, or, and talking about careers, it's not really professional to talk that way, or because I'm white presenting, like I am biracial, that either being white or Arab, like people are like, why do you talk like that? Like, what is that from? So anyway, I always thought I had to be louder. I even won most unique in high school. I didn't even know anybody, but like I was just so eccentric. So I think I went over the line with my authentic self. It was like, I have all odds against me, so why not just scream it as loud as possible? And I've talked about this a lot, but when you are femme presenting, or especially when you're trans femme presenting, the life cycle is a lot shorter, or it's typically shorter for us. So there's always like this exposed danger that I have. Even this morning on the train here, I had something that happened to me, and it's just something that is worrisome or scary, and it's like can definitely make you hide yourself. But at some point, I just realized, like, I'm on this planet, and then I will not be on this planet. So how do I want to live that life cycle? If I live in fear, then what happens? And if I live out loud, then what happens? So I'm constantly going through this like elastic of back and forth of being like, how much do I want to be and how little do I want to be? And at some point I was just like, there's always going to be someone that's not going to like it. So why bother hiding it?
I love that. I agree with that like there's always going to be someone that doesn't like it. So why hide it? So thank you I think that's a great way to wrap that question up. So thank you for that. So the next question, I feel like we kind of touched on this, so it's up to y'all if you want to do this question or go to the next one. But this question is, are there any ways that you adjust yourself / your identity when you are at work? Any thoughts on that?
I think I kind of pivot them depending on who I'm with. So like, for example, I'm a parent. So like that might also be something that a part of my identity that like I might connect with, as Jessica mentioned, like a tall white male, to make myself, actually, this is like a true confession here, to make myself feel a lot less scared to say, we're both parents, cool, we have some commonality. So like a lot of times, like just like humanizing things, a lot of times like I'll bring different aspects of my identity by reading the room. I have been a facilitator for many, many years. So like that's my way of connecting, is to say like, oh, okay, we have this in common. This is what I'm gonna like kind of project today. And to be perfectly honest, it does feel authentic to me. I don't feel like I'm really like trying or anything like that. It really just like, because that human connection is really so important. I think that that's where I would kind of like pivot it depending on who I'm with. If I'm in my office like by myself, then like I would say I don't necessarily like pivot anything more than any other aspect of my personality or of my identity. But I think that that is where I personally would adjust, is like really just based on the room around me and how to connect.
My answer is short, so I'm happy to go next, and it's no. I stopped adjusting myself a long time ago. You know, I stopped caring about how I'm perceived because as I just mentioned in the chat, I do great work. I'm here. And while it may not be traditional or classical or the standard, it's not incorrect. It's just new. So yeah, I stopped doing that a long time ago. And I'm like, again, what you see is what you get. It's right on the surface. And that doesn't define the work I do. Actually, I do quite a lot of work. So, and I try to do it very diligently and very perfectly. So to me, it's like, what does it matter the way I speak or the way I dress?
I think this is a layered question. I'm thinking about places I've worked in the past where I didn't feel safe. So there was a level of adjusting myself to, be more in the background. And that's like, I'm thinking about anyone who's going to tune into this recorded version, like look for work. I guess my encouragement is to look for space where you don't feel that, like eggshells. Like if there's some eggshells going on and you have to adjust and there's pressure or oppression, then there's something very unhealthy about that. So keep an eye on it. Don't let it last too long. I know people have to pay bills and they have to stay and endure for a time, but definitely be checking in with folks who can, support you transition out of that space into a safer space where you don't have to be adjusting your identity. That itself, that phrase, adjust your identity, that's kind of loaded to me. And I was telling Jess, Jess and I have one-on-ones. Jess is my supervisor. So like, we're talking about how we want to establish our one-on-one time as a no eggshell zone. So where like adjusting is not an issue. Like, what? I looked at that question like, I don't experience that so much at Emerson. Not every space is safe, but I guess more spaces are here than I have experienced before. And that's a blessing. I know that not everyone will agree with that. And that's legit. But that's been my experience.
Can I ask a follow-up question on that one of our presenters? Which is just, are there spaces or places, I guess, that you don't go into because you feel like you might be walking on eggshells or you might be at risk, personal harm, threat, safety, whatever, and that bums you out? You know what I mean? I'm thinking work and maybe just in general, like, does that question make sense? Yeah. Because I agree, it's much healthier and easier to find places, institutions, locations where you can be your full self, but that does narrow down somewhat, so just wondering if anybody feels like you've had to, that there's been some losses in that at all.
I'll jump in again and again. I'm saying this from my own point of view, but there are many, many spaces where I feel unsafe. I mean, even on Friday, I was dressed a little bit more outspoken. And I'm early in my transition, but as I'm changing, it's becoming more noticeable. But anyway, a lot of spaces I feel unsafe, but I'm not, the fear of hiding myself is greater than the fear of my well-being and my safety. So the fear of disguising who I am is much greater to my well-being than the fear of like physical harm. Because like, I think external harm or being unsafe is one thing. And it's like, okay, I can fix that. But the fear of compromise or the fear of disguise or the fear of pretend is significantly more hindrance to who I am as a person. So yeah, there's like the unsafetyness, but I'm like willing to bypass that. I'm like, I don't care anymore. And again, when I was younger, I would definitely disguise myself, but I'm like, I can't do that anymore because I was unhappy, unwell. And there's so many layers to that I had to hide that I'm like, I just can't do that anymore.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I really I'm loving this, especially like thinking about like I was looking in the chat like at Emerson specifically, like at least like for me, I'm just thinking like, when I first got here, I was like not really sure like, like what like the vibe is, obviously. And like I think that's like just a general thing when you're going to something for the first time or with a new group of people. And like I got this job at Intercultural and like I then realized like like, you know, you also, the supervisors and stuff, like they created a space where being your authentic self is the only way you could be, which I think is interesting. And like, just like with intercultural, like to me on Jamaica, like it's all about being your authentic self. Like you're only going to be doing the work to the best of your ability if you're your authentic self. And so I think like even as like a first job for me, this is like my first job, like it's amazing to have that as like my like role model is like they're like they're really their authentic selves, and they're like like you should be your authentic self. Like there should be no other way to like bring yourself into these spaces. So literally love that so much. So yeah, thank you all so much. I'm loving this a lot so far. Are we good to move on to the next question? I know it kind of interrupted Chris. Chris asked a question and only Drew got to answer. I'm not sure if there's anyone else who wanted to add to that.
I think I'll quickly add a thought to it, that at least at Emerson, if there's a space on campus where we don't, or I don't, or whatever, a community doesn't feel safe, I feel like there's a critical mass behind that group of people that's can kind of like gather there together and say, look, this is wrong, and be able to say that and fight for it. So that's one thing I appreciate about our community, is that if there are unsafe spaces, people are going to say something. You know, it's not going to go that long without folks trying to fight for making that space safer. That's not true everywhere, though. So it's a gift that I don't want to take for granted.
Find your people. That's the thing. It's like part of, but find your people and interrogate what is considered professional. And that is, it's just so important, because we get drilled into our mind that speaking and presenting and using certain words is considered professional. And really it's just oppressive language. It's white supremacist language, like call it what it is. And so find your people that are willing to call that out in the workplace to make where you work more comfortable. You know, every place isn't perfect, but find your people, interrogate professionalism.
I love, that's awesome. I was literally, me and Tamia both put exactly what you just said in the chat, because that really, I'm definitely gonna like leave this conversation with like those words. So thank you so much for that. Okay, so our next question is, what would you say, wait, did I do this one? Are some of the largest barriers you have faced in bringing your authentic self to work? Kind of touched on that a little, but if there's any other thoughts on that.
I'll jump in. I got fired once for wearing a dress to work. Totally got fired for it. Yeah, and they were like, we don't want someone who is, I forget how they used it, someone who's going to act something about unprofessional, or like, you can't be the face. I don't know. Probably. Oh, definitely. But I mean, it was like a nothing job. It is. And, you know, it's like that is obviously a big barrier. And it's like, oh my God, it's so much to go through and blah, blah, blah. But again, you cannot let that hold you down, because I'm here now. I'm still alive, and I can now help many, many other people. And that's, I think I found my calling is to like help a younger population after these last 10 years, you know, 3 years after college, I'll say, because I'm so young. In navigating their space, especially in like such an artistic and creative community, because like you think that the arts or creative community, age is absolutely a state of mind. And I am 22, and that's how old I am. But yeah, in creative spaces, I feel like we can be a little bit more loose. And of course, we always say Emerson is a bubble, and like there's so much we can do. And then when we go outward, it's not the same. But yeah, there's still a lot of barriers. There's so many barriers in so many places. It's endless. Again, that could be a whole different Tough Topic Tuesday, is the amount of barriers that exist, physical or, you know, figuratively, regarding a career or trajectory that you want to do.
Guess I'll go next. So in a previous role that I had, one of the sort of like the ways that I butt heads with we'll call him Mike, was trying to elevate voices of color when we did scenarios and facilitation. So that was where, you know, to me, that came very naturally to want to elevate voices of color. And this person was saying like, oh, we're going to alienate the audience if we do that. So that was a huge barrier, because I was trying to, you know, just like very kindly and very tactfully talk about an issue that was very important and was getting suppressed and suppressed and suppressed. So I wrote a timeline for when I would resign and, you know, all that good stuff, staying within the confines of, you know, of our own career development process and all of that as, you know, employees ourselves. But yeah, that was a huge barrier, because I feel like I was like paid a lot of lip service, but then like ultimately like suppressed each step of the way. So that felt like a huge barrier to, you know, just like promoting something that's very important and just being suppressed all ways and steps of that. So that is why I specifically decided to come into a role like this, where a huge part of my job is to elevate, you know, voices of those that are not represented and have been historically marginalized. So I feel like, you know, now it just feels like, you know, just like this weight has been lifted off my shoulders, where, you know, I get to do something like that without being suppressed. So it's again, a journey, and very grateful that that's something that I can now do without the suppression, and having to like really use the words like, oh, well, this is good because of, like, really just using a lot of words that really just reek of white supremacy to be able to like try to get my point across, to ultimately still be crushed. So just did not feel good, but much better now.
I work for someone who was once a bully. And I think that if I could go back and do it differently, I would have asked certain questions of this particular supervisor, who will go unnamed. This is many, many years ago, but it was a very white, female dominated workplace. I was the only woman of color. It was very cliquish. It's very cliquish, did not feel safe. But I reached a point where my stress level was so high getting ready to go to work that I just said to myself, I will not do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. And so I sat down with her. I said, I need to talk to you. And I was very honest with her about the work environment that she had created, her lack of patience, her attitude. It was just extremely difficult. And I left that day. I would say that looking back, it was probably a pretty traumatic experience. I got through it. I got the mental health support that I needed, and it took a lot at that age in my early 20s to confront a boss. So pat on the back for young Jessica, but that was a huge barrier, and it taught me to interview the hell out of whoever is interviewing you, because it goes both ways. Ask the questions, look around you for what's being said, what's not being said, talk to other people that work at that company, talk to other people that have worked with certain people. That will only help. But that was a barrier that you know, that I had to go through. And yeah.
Thank you. I mean, I'm not sure. Did you started this, I think, at the beginning, or did you want to? I don't
Oh,
remember.
me?
Yeah.
Yeah, I know. While I was listening, I don't think I did actually, but Jess
Yeah.
kind of opened the door for me sharing, you know, something from the past as well, where power structures that existed or probably still exist in a previous institution, and competition within teams, and territorialism and all that crap. So stupid. Such a waste of time. Like, I wish I would know. I would have known. Like, if I could talk to the person, to myself, going through that stuff. Like, don't tolerate this anymore. You're better than this. You're more valuable than this. Someone else will appreciate, or another college or department will appreciate what you have to offer. So those are the kinds of things you want to look for. And like when Jessica was saying, like interrogate or interview the heck out of the place you're looking at. Like, do their research, like look up those companies, look up their staff profiles, see what's coming out of those profiles, you know. Look for maybe, you know, alumni that work at certain places and see what their experience has been. Because you want to use your time as best as possible and land in those great match spaces where you can thrive and build yourself up instead of being in a space where you're torn down. So yeah, I think in a word, power is a barrier. When people don't empower you, could be getting oppressed by someone else's power. So I don't know. I would say stay tuned in to those little things. Microaggression has macro impact, and it's a lot to work through on the healing end, and that takes time too. So I'll leave it at that for now, I guess.
I know, Lynn, is it? You said in the comment that, or in the chat, that you wanted to add something. If you want to do that, you could go
Yeah,
ahead.
so I just feel bad for being late, but hello, everyone. So I had a prior meeting, so I'm glad I can join this conversation and just listen to everyone's, insight. And so I wanted to make sure that I fully understood the context of this conversation. But to piggyback off of Jess, something that she had mentioned earlier with just, moving forward in your career, from my personal experience, since I'm literally fairly new to Emerson still. But one of the things I did too with, this past job search was making sure that I was identifying, people that could, help me along the way with my career. So I've been fortunate enough to be in higher education for most of my professional career, and had people who, still to this day serve as mentors. But I think it's important, just as your job searching yourself as a student, to kind of talk to people who worked at these companies prior to see what they're saying, to see what their experiences is like. I kind of use the same tool to kind of gauge, as I'm interviewing at different places. So that was super helpful. But I think it was really, for me, learning from past experiences, to see who's really going to help pull me in the right direction. So, and sometimes it comes down to making a decision for yourself on whether it's, you take charge of your own destiny, and then, whether that means move on elsewhere, or building up the courage to confront. So, so Jess, like, 2 snaps to you for confronting. I think that was something that took me a very long time to become comfortable with, especially early on in my professional career.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much. All great advice. For me, even, because I know, like, my brother, he was like telling me he worked in like a predominantly, he's in tech, and he works in like sometimes he was working in a space, it was like predominantly white. It was all these like people from France, and like he was the only person of color there. And I remember he said he would interview people of color, and they wouldn't take them. They would take the other people. And he would always be so confused as to like why they weren't hiring these people that were just as qualified. And it's because they were working in agriculture, and they saw people of color predominantly as these workers on the farms and the fields. And my brother said that he felt like they would just keep that mindset into their hiring process, and not really give people the time of day because of their own like just racist and like white supremacist ways of thinking. And he wasn't able to like speak up to the boss because it's a hard thing to do. So again, props to you for that. And he ended up leaving the company, but it's really hard to like speak up to people, especially when you are of an identity that isn't in the like power or whatever. So yeah.
I will also add to that. This is at another institution that I worked at, but it's also like finding like your little like community of people at the institution you're at, or the employer that you're at, right? So I had a coworker that I didn't work directly with, but she was fairly new and was working in California, was mixed race. So she was, half Asian, and also I want to say Filipino or Hispanic. I could be wrong, but was telling me how when she was interviewing, and this is, I see you hear and you read about these cases all the time, but it kind of like broke my heart, where she would go by her middle name, which was Sharon, instead of, her full first name. And like that broke my heart because, and she told me literally she did notice a difference with getting like phone interviews just by the name that she would use. So she kind of disclosed that to me. Didn't seem too fazed by it. Like that was just like a normalized thing. It broke my heart, but it's, it is a challenge that she was going through, that she had to kind of conform. So I think with me personally, it's like that pressure to conform, right? At what point do you ask yourself, like, how much are you willing to pretty much like sacrifice part of your identity and not be like your true self. To what extent, because you do need these opportunities, but you're also up against, some challenges as well. Like my mom shared with me years later that when considering naming us, my first name, Lin, L-I-N-H, which is Vietnamese, it's unisex, but my brother's name, Thai, T-H-A-I, and both my mom and dad were deliberate on naming us names that were Vietnamese in heritage, but also wouldn't be a process for us later when we went like a quality, I don't even think it's right to call it like a quality of life hinder, but just we had like friends and also relatives that their kids had literally would go through the name change process because it just made, filing for things and getting paperwork, things a lot easier for them. And so they didn't want to see us go through that same thing. And so gave us kind of like similar names where it's part of us still, but yet we wouldn't feel pressure to have to add a name or change a name later in life.
Yeah. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at the clock. We only have 5 minutes left, sadly. So I think the best way, in my opinion, to end this would be on the question of what advice would you give to students in regard to bringing their authentic selves to internships and jobs?
I'm happy to jump in quickly, but that's because I have a 1 p.m. appointment. But I always tell everyone this, and like, don't be afraid to put your pronouns on your resume, especially for someone like me. My name is Drew, so it can go either way, and it goes neither way. I was actually just talking about this to another student, and it was, if you're applying to a job and they're asking for BIPOC or LGBTQA plus like advised to apply, like don't be afraid to reference that in your application. Not that you are, but like the company's commitment to X group is a reason why I'm applying, because it's important to me and it's a value that we can share. So finding values in a company that are for you and that you share with the company and that you want to make an impact. You want to make a stand of, this is part of the work that I do and it's part of the work that I want to do with you. So there's a way to say it that's a career oriented, and it's like, I'm not just this person, but I also want to do this work with you. And that would be my advice.
I would say leverage the alumni network. It's going to sound like an infomercial plug, but Emerge is one of the resources we talk about a lot. Like, I think one of us said, like, find alum that worked at previous companies. So Emerge is huge. Find your allies, because even if you do find that the people in your organization are underrepresented, some of these places do walk the walk and have employee resource groups. You also find people that are active allies, not performative allies, but sort of observe, take it all in, as you're starting at these places. But those are the 2 pieces of advice, to drive home for you guys.
Thank you. I'm writing all of this down.
I would throw in, I'll try to make this quick. Know what you want out of a place. If you want the internship and, image or appearance or some other criteria is not a priority for you, and you feel like you just want to get in and you want to maybe change the culture once you're in, just keep your agency and know that those are decisions that you own. This is a whole conversation. It's really hard to sum up in a couple sentences, but keep your agency, know what you want, prioritize, meet with us, for a longer discussion about these topics, for sure. And, find your people here so you can grow in your own authenticity here as you're looking, because it's all like all these things go hand in hand. So, we can help and support you as you do that as well.
I'm very much going to piggyback on that and say, brainstorm with us. We're absolutely here to be able to brainstorm. Maybe something that you think that you want to apply for ends up being something that you don't want at all. And being able to verbally process it is a great way to be able to do that too. So we're really at the Career Development Center, I know I sound like I'm pitching it as well. We really are here for you to be able to just navigate that. Maybe there's a job that you're interested in, and being able to use those words authentically. I just met with a student, and one of like the greatest things was like her personal statement sounded exactly like her. So she was bringing her authentic self forward. So being able to really help you process that together. So yeah.
Yay, thank you so much. Yeah, bringing your authentic self forward and sort of being able to like show that when you're going out there, I think is really important. So thank you for that. We have one more minute. Lynn or Chris, if either of you want to add to that also, you're welcome to. And to Mia, of course.
Yeah, I think it's, echoing many of the things that my colleagues have mentioned before, don't be afraid to ask or just, brainstorm ideas. Like Sharon had mentioned, the more information we know, we can help connect people to resources or just help clarify things that might seem not like, if a student's having a hard time with like responsibilities or just what the roles entails, we can help navigate like the conversation, how to have that difficult conversation, or just connect them to resources that best would assist them. So oftentimes, when I work with students in my previous roles at different institutions, it's really just helping them make the connection with like the resources available. And oftentimes they don't even know that, we have something like Emerge or, like online resources and what's accessible to them. So.
Well, and I just say, Clarissa, since you're the remaining student here, just to echo what Drew said, you have lots of stuff you can put on your resume even without having to put stuff in your cover letter that speaks to who you are. I mean, when you put on your job with Intercultural, when you put on your roles with other orgs around campus, I would definitely recommend that you do that. Like back in the day when it was a little harder to come out right out of the gate, like I would just put my clubs and orgs on my resume that I had been involved with around LGBTQ stuff. And that said to an employer, like, this is who I am, whether the job had anything to do with that or not. You know what I mean? So definitely use that stuff to your advantage.
Chris, that's such a good point. I used to do that more subtly when I was like very meek and like not willing to really say it directly on my cover letter. And yeah, a lot of like allyship definitely was like right there, and additional or leadership. It was all like, right in your face. So that's a great point.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Wow. It's 1:02, but thank you all so much. I wrote down a lot of quotes. I'm going to put them on the Instagram because I think this is like really valuable, and it's like hard for people to come at this time of the day that are students. So I'm going to put this out and make sure people see it, if that's all right with all of you, with like your names. But yeah, thank you so much. Just want to let you all know I joined Emerge yesterday, and I'm planning on coming to the Career Development Center soon because I have some things I want to talk about. So yeah. Thank you all so much for being here. I really enjoyed that, and I hope you have a great day and rest of the week.